And how about yourself?
Pretty good.
Good. Good deal. What is new in Great Falls?
Oh, not much. You know, I live up in Choteau, and we've just had our first wave of the past 3 weeks of COVID in Teton County. So
Oh, yeah.
that was, yeah.
Was it older people or?
No, it was kind of stemmed from there was about a 300 or 400 person wedding over by Augusta that it got spread at, and it just went out, and yeah. But most of that's dying down finally.
I assume you guys are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
Staying at home. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I actually have an underlying lung condition, so I'm safely socially distancing. But it's crazy. I was supposed to, Dave with Timeless Seeds and I were supposed to get together last week, and he had to drop out because the farm he was at up by Turner, actually the hired man and everybody got COVID.
Oh, wow.
So he decided to quarantine for 14 days.
Was it an organic farm? Just out of curiosity.
I'm pretty sure, yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Hi, Walter and Will.
Howdy. Hi there.
I will be admitting people, so. Talk among yourselves.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jamie. Did you hear me come in?
I didn't know it was you. Hi, Becky.
Hi.
I'll let you lead the discussion. How's that sound?
Okay.
Yep. 60 pounds. 125 grams. Yeah, 60 pounds of shoulder.
Someone, if mute your, please mute if you're not talking to the gathering.
So we don't see any of that.
Good morning, Wes.
Oh. Now, good morning. Hi, Randy. Still haven't cleaned my office. I can do that. So.
Yes, hang on 1 second. Retractor. Yeah, so he's going to get less. So retractor means he's going to get, just give him 20. Yeah, no, of the.
If you're not addressing the meeting, could you please mute? Welcome, everyone. We have about 14 people on, 15.
So Jamie, would you like to get started or wait a little bit longer, or what do you think?
I think you can start.
Okay. And hopefully people will make their presence known if they arrive late. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. And I guess, as Jamie said, really, I think the plan today is to spend a little bit of time listening to Wes, who's been involved with this whole meat packing issue for a very long time, from several different angles. And I think that's a good way to put a focus on all the different pieces of the problem. And after that, I think we should discuss that. And I guess I would like to see if we are close to reaching some consensus on what the goals of this group are. I mean, to some extent, I think we may accidentally achieve some things just by remaining connected and keeping each other updated. Um, but I think if we can focus some goals more carefully beyond that, probably it would be useful. So anyway, Wes, would you like to go ahead and tell us what you want to tell us?
Well, sure. I guess what I was asked to talk about is the effects that COVID-19 have had on our operation, and unlike a lot of other operations, I guess, or other businesses, our meat business has increased sales pretty dramatically. One of the first things that we discovered was that people were hoarding more than just toilet paper. And so there was a huge groundswell of ground beef sales for us through stores all over the state, and that kind of faded a little bit, but it's still stronger than what it would have been. We've seen a lot of new competitors as other ranches have seen opportunities and jumped right in the middle of them. There are lots of people trying to sell $10 ground beef, and I think some of those are making it. There are others that are selling for about half of that, and I guess our theory on that is we're happy for the extra business, but we know that there are a lot of people that are without jobs currently, or somewhat stranded financially. So we've resolved to keep our prices pretty much where they are, unless we run into actual increases in our cost of doing business. We'd like to stay in business. The other thing that we've seen is we are not regular donors to the Livingston Food Resource Center, which is essentially a food pantry in Livingston. And what we figured out to do, and we've been doing this for quite a while, is we don't make regular donations of product to them, but we make them when they can't call anywhere else and get donations. So we just kind of backstop that program. They got into kind of tough shape when the hoarding, probably late March, early April. They were having trouble stocking up, and so we did some things then. Since then, they've been fairly quiet. So the donations of meat must be pretty good for their program. So we're pretty thrilled about that. Probably the most dramatic change that we've seen anywhere is in processing, and we have a strong relationship with Pioneer Meats and Big Timber. We've been, of the mindset, both of us, from when we started doing business a little over 10 years ago, that we would support each other and try and partner on things more than have just a straight up relationship. What we've seen is that demand for processing has skyrocketed. They're up 80% over last year in the amount of product they're trying to push through the same plant. And we still have spots available for slaughter. I think if you were just to call on the phone and have animals you wanted to take in and have processed, you're probably looking somewhere around February and March at this point. But again, we've been their biggest customer for processing for over 10 years, and we have some other things that we do with them that are a little bit different. We pick up all of the slaughter waste from the plant and compost it here on the ranch. And that's turned into a really big deal for us just lately because of the increased volume, and especially now as we're headed into fair season. The Gallatin County Fair animals are mostly through the plant now, or at least in the plant. But we've got another 4 counties fairs that'll go through there, which really puts an extra load on us for our composting. We're very unusual, I guess, for a grass-fed operation. One of the things that we've learned since we've started doing this composting is that we have to have cattle that are in confinement for at least part of their lives. And it's, you know, there are a lot of our competitors in the grass-fed world that, you know, make a big deal out of, you know, never having their animals in confinement, but we have to have manure in order to make our composting work. And if the cattle go poop out in the pastures, it's pretty hard to collect. So we do that. At the same time, we also don't have to be tied to specific things or specific projects in the feedlot. So if it rains or, you know, it gets wet, all we have to do is open the gates and let them out into the pastures where we'd had them grazing anyway, and things work out pretty well. You know, and I guess another thing in meat processing, as that business has grown, we have to think a lot farther ahead in our processing for our products like hot dogs and sausages and the brats and other things that we do there. You know, prior to the COVID effects on the market, you know, usually if we said we wanted something made for us in those kinds of lines, you know, a week to 10 days from, you know, hey, Brian, I think we need some, you know, some of our Santa Barbara hot dogs, you know, in a week or 10 days, we'd have them on the shelf and ready to ship out. That's stretched out now to 3 or 4 weeks. And if there are any disruptions in the supply chain beyond Pioneer, such as seasonings, and we have run into that, you know, that 3 to 4 weeks seems to be stretching out. I don't know quite how long right this minute. So it creates an inventory issue for us. We try and have, you know, product on hand routinely, and it's become a lot more difficult to do that. So we're having to pay a lot more attention to where we think we're going to be in, you know, a few weeks out, and figure out how to allow for reordering in order to make that work. You know, I guess in terms of what's actually happening with our business, we budgeted very aggressively for this year, and with 55% of the year gone, we've hit 62% of our annual projected sales, and that includes some months that usually aren't too big for us. The only thing coming up, I guess, is we always in the past have had turkeys just kind of step on our business pretty hard in November, and you know, so that's still coming up. But I think we're going to end up having a pretty good year. One of the things that I really miss is, you know, we're not making any personal sales calls anymore, and it seems like those have always been our most effective way to sell products, especially on the wholesale side where we're dealing with stores. If we can actually get in and see the stores and talk to the managers and figure out what they're doing. So we aren't doing that, and we're fielding an awful lot of phone calls, mostly from individuals and families that call in, and we're seeing a lot of people that'll buy half a beef that maybe haven't done that in the past. And you can build good customer relationships that way, but you really have to understand what people need when they're not sure what they need or how to order for how they eat in their homes. So those are the things, I guess, that, you know, that I've seen and what's affected our business. You know, as far as the year itself, we've had really good moisture. Last year was spectacular. This year is good and probably above average. So on the production side, we're in good shape. And on the sales side, we're in better shape than we maybe want to be. But if we can work out, I guess, you know, how to deal with our inventory issues, that'll be great. we've had some freezer issues here in the past couple of weeks, excuse me, that have caused us some heartburn, but it looks like we're finally getting that all put behind us, and we're actually going to have some extra space for store and inventory here coming up in the next week. So that's what I know.
Thanks, Wes. That's a pretty good overview of the issues that people face, and I think that, I mean, most you guys are aware that Wes and his colleagues have really invested a lot of time, effort, and money into Pioneer, so they have a more special relationship than the average producer does. Does anybody want to comment or question specifically related to Wes's stuff before we expand that to a little bit broader discussion?
I have a question. Hi, this is Martha Kaufman. I'm curious, Wes, are you with that? You said like Livingston's needs for the food bank were really, really acute in March, April, and that the demand has gone skyrocketing. Are you seeing that drop off a little bit as like Livingston maybe isn't having the need in the food bank as much? Are you also seeing the push for and the number of calls you're getting for your product drop off a little bit, or is it staying consistent?
Okay.
Not that far into it. I'm just wondering if there's any trends you're seeing.
No, those are really good questions. I guess for the Food Resource Center, I don't suspect that their demand has dropped much, but I think what has happened is that the supply chain has opened up, and it's easier for people to donate a little bit to the resource center. So I think it's more of the supply side improving rather than demand side declining. That is the reason I haven't heard from you for a while. And we talk fairly regularly. And then as far as the customers that call, yeah, that's leveled off a bit. Instead of one every day or every other day, we're getting maybe a call a week, I guess, for somebody looking to buy a half a beef. So that's the kind of the area where we are, but it has leveled out, I guess. And as there are changes in people getting out of the house or being more active and doing different things, I think we're seeing, I want to say normalization, but I'm not sure that really is the term that I want to get after, but kind of an equalization, of supply and demand a little bit, or things kind of running together in a way that makes it easier to manage.
Anybody else have comments, questions for Wes? Well, I think, it's no surprise that all the stuff Wes is talking about raises issues that we touched on last time. And I guess I would like to get people's perspective on where they want this to go. And I think I'll just start by inserting a few of my own personal perspective comments, just as a starting point. The kind of stuff Wes is discussing is really primarily focused on feeding people in Montana's local communities, although B-Bar also sells stuff outside local communities. And my view of this group is that I think it's healthy and worthy to have its initial primary goals to be about making sure that the supply chains allow Montana to feed itself nutrient-dense, healthy food as a priority. But as we discussed last time, we all know that Montana is producing more beef than it will eat. And so I would like to think that part of the mission of this group is, as we do what we can to help support the rejuvenation of a decentralized packing system. I think it should be with an eye towards how do we build towards sending meat out of the state, not live animals out of the state, to places like Seattle, Portland, Denver, wherever, places that are not going to produce enough beef to feed themselves. And I don't see these as contradictory goals at all. To the contrary, I think if we think about them together, even if we start with local as a priority, that may be one of the more powerful ways to rebuild the rural economy in Montana.
This is Jeff Shazinski. Can I comment on that?
Please go ahead.
I would like everyone's view, or anyone's. There's two pieces of legislation in the Congress right now, and they're basically derived. They're basically the same bill. It's called New Markets for State Inspected Meat and Poultry Act. Senator Tester has, I think, is a co-sponsor in the Senate. And what it would do would be allow state inspected meat products to enter into interstate commerce. To me, this has been a long-standing issue that has inhibited the development of both local and regional markets in this state. And I'm wondering, Joel, is your feel that is a priority bill or a priority idea that could expand and help the cattle industry in Montana?
I have a question, Jeff. I mean, I think it makes all the sense in the world, and previous efforts in this direction have failed as far as I can understand, primarily because of lobbyists for the meatpacking industry, which have prevented this. Do you have reason to believe that it has better chance of success right now, and or do you have suggestions for how the members of this group might help it succeed?
I agree. I think that the meatpacking industry and others will fight this as they have always fought it. I do think this is probably one of the most opportune times to possibly succeed, given the situation that we're in. But I have no, so yes, we're Montana. We are important in the cattle industry. We have a voice, but it's amongst many in the nation when you're talking about federal legislation, and there are many people trying to mess this up and not have it happen, and that's this life in federal politics.
This is Barnett. I wanted to share something on that. I think outside of lobbyists of the meat industry, you'll also find a hesitance to open that up by public service, civil servant, as well as public health officials within the Food Safety Inspection Service. One of the concerns that USDA has consistently held, and I just say this because I was involved in those discussions for about 7 years, is that if states do not meet exactly a level of equivalency with USDA inspection, and that stuff starts to cross state lines in commerce, then that's going to call into question many of our international trade obligations with other countries. And I think one of the concerns that USDA has oftentimes stopped that legislation, it's not always, big meat packers and others, it's actually USDA stopping that legislation because that question has never been answered. And I think that if states like Montana and others are able to revisit, how inspection is done, how is carried out, and have true equivalency determinations with FSIS, which is foreseen by these, you would see that USDA would start supporting that stuff. But I would say that USDA has taken a line against that stuff over the years, not just meat packers.
Yeah, and you're precisely right. That argument has already been brought up. And actually, I understand that the bill might be modified to deal with the international trade issue of that. And yes, I do agree that but to me, the law says they are equivalent. If they're equivalent, has never made any sense to me. If you have to meet that standard of equivalency, why it shouldn't have been able to enter interstate commerce. And it may not just be the meat packers, you're right. But just think of the possibility of expanding markets. If we could have that ability, And if state inspected facilities right now are even thinking of maybe going to federal and or expanding, this would be so helpful in the ability to have regional markets, which I think would be critical to make Becky's goal that the product leaving Montana is not live cows, but meat products.
Jeff, this is Jan Tusick. I'd like to ask a question. Becky, is that okay?
No problem.
Please do.
Number one, is there someone from the Montana Department of Livestock on this call? Hearing none, I think that's the first step, is to be discussing this with our Department of Livestock. And it has been my vague memory that when that did, kind of that language was put into the Farm Bill way back, that we had not necessarily a rousing support from our state Department of Livestock. And if we're going to be proactive in this, I think we need to engage that agency and that and encourage them to be deeply involved in these discussions and be kind of our advocate in moving this forward.
Jan, I totally agree with you. Actually, Jamie and I had some discussions about how best to involve the Department of Livestock. And before our first call, I had some communications with Ben Thomas, Department of Ag, to talk about the role of Department of Livestock. I've also had a couple of conversations with a guy I know who's setting up an inspected mobile till plant, and for his particular project, he's actually had very good success working with DOL. I mean, your point is completely correct, and I will reach out again to figure out how to proceed on that, since I know some of the people there. But also going back to Barnett's point, I don't know whether this is a question or a comment, but I do understand that USDA has played a role in these discussions about interstate commerce. I guess one thing I have as a question is the initial request for allowing interstate commerce is not necessarily the same as allowing to be involved in international trade. And I think we have to be precise in what we're talking about and how the distinction is made, and you may be able to help me out on that front. But I also want to comment that USDA's alleged concern about food safety standards may still, in fact, be the voice of the meat packer talking. In fact, the track record for the super large scale meatpacking industry in terms of food safety is far worse if you want to look at pounds of recalled meat and number of people sick. So what you're saying is true about the USDA role, but I think it's something that we may want to develop some strategies for addressing rather than strategies for accepting.
Yeah, this is Barnett. The only thing I'd mention in regards to USDA's hesitance on these issues is not so much to allow state inspected meat to ever enter into international commerce. It's that if USDA doesn't hold states to the exact same standards that they would any foreign certifying agency, then under the WTO SPS agreement, we fall to essentially what's referred to as national treatment, and we'd be in violation of that trade agreement. And that's why USDA has consistently stated that if they're going to do that, then every single state has to reach the appropriate level of protection that's established by FSIS. And that's where things have broken down over the years.
Okay, that's helpful.
This is Walter Schweitzer.
Go ahead.
This is Walter Schweitzer, and I think Jeff's point is probably that the USDA is utilizing FSIS, FMIA, Food Safety Inspection, Federal Meat Inspection Act, rules in there to protect the multinational packers. Those rules were put in there by the multinational packers. It's really in the name of food safety, but it's total bullshit. And as Jeff said, the rules say if the state inspected plant meets the federal guidelines, then And it's just totally asinine to say that our state inspected plants that are held to the same standard as the USDA inspected plants can't ship across state lines when a meat processing plant in Brazil or Africa is only meeting those same standards. They're not exceeding any of these standards, and yet they're allowed access across state lines. I've been working with Tester and Bullock and the Department of Livestock, and I do believe that Jan Tusik is correct that there's hesitant when it comes from the custom butchers. The Department of Livestock is really hesitant to allow custom butchers to process meat for sale. Again, I think this is ridiculous, but as far as the state inspected plants, they're adamant that these state inspected plants meet the standards of the USDA and should be allowed to export meat across the state lines. And they have too been working with Daines and Tester, mostly Tester, to try to get the USDA to waive the rule requirement to enforce these rules during a crisis. But, you know, to Becky's point, we only process about 10% of the meat that we eat in Montana. Why don't we just get our processing capacity built to the capacity to feed ourselves? That would make a huge difference for the Montana livestock producers, but more importantly, the Montana consumers, because we don't have to worry about the risk of a plant being shut down in Iowa or Nebraska. We don't have to worry about the risk of the shit that Brazil brings in because we don't have country of origin labeling. You go to the grocery store and you're buying burger from Brazil, Mexico, Canada. You have no idea where it comes from. And quite frankly, it is not produced at the same standard as it is in the United States. So I think our first and biggest focus should be build our capacity to feed ourselves.
This is Jan again. I would like to just comment on that. I think the low-hanging fruit here is beef in Montana schools. And I have a tendency to say, let's start with a really targeted step in our efforts that can be high level of success. And I think getting Montana beef in our schools would be a really highly visible target that could really create some opportunity in rolling things forward. Our biggest barrier there, of course, is a free commodity beef, but what can legislature do to mitigate that would be the question I would ask. So that would be my sense, Walter, is like, let's get targeted. Let's go after some real focus and see what how we can really just shift this needle in a very targeted way.
And but do school districts allow state inspected product into their school districts? Correct?
Absolutely.
They do.
It's all internal policy.
In all of them.
It's internal policy. We have independent school districts in the state of Montana.
But do they allow state inspected product into their?
Absolutely.
They do right now. I'm
yes.
asking for now.
I know several schools that bring in state inspected meat in their schools. But right now, the biggest barrier has been the competition of free commodity beef. It's hard to compete against free. So how do we address that? And that's what it just means. If we're going to get an action going, let's get a real targeted one. That's what I get excited about.
Hi, this is Matt Skoglund talking. This is my first time in the call. Appreciate the invitation. I'm the guy Becky was referring to earlier with the mobile slaughter unit. New bison ranch up in a couple years old in the Shields Valley, and we've sold direct to consumer from day one. We just acquired a mobile slaughter unit that we're hoping will help with processing capacity. And I've been involved. There's another bunch of folks on a different call that One Montana and I have been working on, and it's both processors, mainly producers. And I guess a couple comments that Becky mentioned DOL, and yeah, I mean, they've been super supportive. Marty Zalewski was just quoted a couple weeks ago on this exact issue had some strong quotes saying that it's crazy that we can't sell across state lines. And I think, anyways, I that'd be great if those rules can get changed in DC, but I'm not holding my breath. And the point that Marty and Mike Honeycutt made on a call we had with DOL was that there's nothing to stop any of us on this call or anywhere else from opening a new processing facility, a small one, a medium one, what have you, under the existing rules and regs. And so that's what on this other call, what we're focused on is trying to increase that processing capacity right now, because as you guys know, it's very limited, and there's also many ranchers trying to convert either part of their herd or all of their herd to be able to process it here in the state, and they can't. Even people who are already doing it are having trouble finding processing. And so, anyways, that's what we're working on, and so I would just, my 2 cents would be, whether it's some of the stuff we're talking about, I think there's that key step of we don't have processing capacity in Montana. Every single processor state inspected is booked into 2021. And I think it's actually, the situation is just getting worse. So I think to the extent we can focus on increasing processing capacity under the rules right now as fast as possible would be the first step. Thanks.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry. This is Val in Senator Chester's office. Can I pose a quick question to the group? So obviously my boss is supportive of the new Markets for State Inspected Meat Act and, complete interstate shipment allowance. I'm curious, you guys talked a lot about, multinational packers and the influence they've had over this policy area, and my boss tends to agree. I'm curious though, so recently in the House, there was a bill introduced by a South Dakota representative called the DIRECT Act, and it was endorsed by NCBA, which is interesting, and it would allow state-inspected meat facilities to ship meat interstate via e-commerce, so online. Like I said, I want to emphasize my boss is wholly supportive of full interstate shipment, but I'm curious what you guys think about that. I'm curious, just from your perspective, what position that puts Montana in.
This is Becky. I have a couple of comments about that. Many of us who started direct marketing meat a couple of decades ago resorted to using e-commerce because there wasn't enough market in Montana, and it was very helpful in building some businesses. We relied on USDA inspected plants, of course, to do that. The fact that they want to allow this is fine with me, but I really don't think, I think there may be some ulterior motives there. And I think that if this country resorts to selling little cardboard boxes of frozen meat by FedEx and UPS all over the country, that is not going to move us towards sustainability and good health and access for less affluent people. So I'm not against it, but I'm wary of their motives. Stepping back also just a little bit, I mean, based on the comments we were hearing last call and this call, I think there's quite a bit of consensus that we would like to prioritize feeding Montanans, and that, as everybody says, that is possible under the current rules. I think that if we're successful at that, that will be the single strongest building block for then moving to markets in other states. So I echo the desire to make that a priority. And just one other comment to affirm what Walter Schweitzer and others said. USDA has not really been a trustworthy player. I mean, I can tell you horror stories about USDA inspectors going to the old plant in Great Falls and playing games with thermometers and trivial stuff. And, one guy wagged a thermometer in the face of the butcher there, the head butcher, and said, "I got you by the balls," based on some utterly inane regulation. I also think, to follow up on Walt's comments, regardless of what other states are doing to meet USDA requirements in state inspected plants. I think Montana knows that it can meet those standards, and I think that we can proceed standing up for what we think makes sense in the industry based on the track record in Montana. So I mean, Barnett's comments are important. We have to pay attention to them, but I think we need to be bold in asserting what we think makes sense, and the consumers are finally starting to tune in. Well, one other thing, while you guys are figuring out what the next thing you want to say, Jan, I am definitely not ignoring your desire to target efforts towards schools. I think it's really important for obvious reasons, but I think if we make this exclusively about supplying the schools, we won't do as good a job as we can about mustering parents and other businesses. I think we need to have, I think it should be about feeding Montanans and making sure that schools are part of that. But there's a lot of adults who don't pay enough attention to schools. They pay more attention to their own beef.
Walter Schweitzer here again. And I think Matt is absolutely right. It's not necessarily the processing capacity that we need to work on. It's the kill and slaughter. You know, the custom butchers, which cannot kill and slaughter their own for sale, can take a whole carcass. As long as it's been killed and slaughtered in a USDA inspected facility, they can take that whole carcass and then process it for sale. So the weak link in our meat industry right now in Montana is the capacity to kill and slaughter for sale. We have all kinds of custom butchers, all kinds of processing plants. Almost every major grocery store can process the carcass after it's been harvested for sale. So the weak link is what Matt has just talked about, which is using a mobile slaughter plant in his case to kill and slaughter to begin with. But that's the weak link.
Hi, my name is Mark Eastep. Some of you know me from many years ago about, I worked on mobile processing. I had a company called Montana Mobile Processing. I've just gotten back to this and found all these people working on this project now. And I have a theory that we can use mobile processing throughout the state. I know of a manufacturer who you may or may not know of, Trivand in Washington, that can manufacture modular units that will serve to kill and slaughter in the field. And if we set up various locations around the state with a modular cut and wrap facility, we could do this in 6 or 8 months. The theory is that you would have perhaps a group of ranchers in a county or a regional area that makes sense, go in and perform a co-op and buy the unit and buy the modular parts to go with it. You have a freezer system, a cut and wrap room, and it's all modular, and it can be set down in 3 acres of land. You could put this hub, if you will, where it's needed, and the mobile unit could work whatever county or area it is within a couple 100 miles. And this would be able to do the slaughter. It's all USDA inspected. You could get the manufacturer will help with the USDA inspection ticket. I see this as a twofold advantage here. There's one, we could get these in the field in 6 or 8 months, I think, with proper financing and cooperative, getting them together business wise. But also I think they could work as a bridge to Montana building permanent facilities which will meet this coming capacity. I think that's the basic thing. We need to be able to have more fixed facilities. I've been to many of the plants in the state, and they're aging. They're putting things together with Governor Bullock's money, $2 million for infrastructure. They'll be tacking on freezers, and they'll be adding some capacity that way. But it's not enough. It's a Band-Aid, and we need to have permanent facilities, which are where the cows are. I've looked at the MACs and the processing plants, and where the cows are in central and northeastern Montana, there aren't any plants. They have to travel 200-300 miles just to process in Miles City or Billings or wherever. Anyway, that's my spiel.
This is
Yeah, well, go ahead.
oh, sorry. This is Matt Scoglin again.
How you doing?
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't know if I was on mute. Yeah, no. Great points. Couldn't agree more. So our mobile slaughter unit is a tri-van, and I'll spare you the details on the roundabout way we ended up getting it, but it was a little serendipity, a little luck. But yeah, I mean, when we had the call with DOL, I mean, that was their point, is that when we have this thing up and running, whether it's state inspected or federal inspected, that at the end of that day for on-ranch kills, those carcasses that are in the cooler, as Walter was saying, can go anywhere. You know, they can go to Safeway, they could go to, you know, Matt's Meats in Livingston or what have you. And that's what we've been trying to do right now is lots of outreach with the you know, I guess meat cutters around here that don't have a kill floor, but could take, you know, sides of bison or beef or what have you, because the main processors like Amsterdam and Rawhide around here, Pioneer, they're buried. So I just, yeah, I think Walter made some great points. And then I'm sorry, I missed your name at the beginning because I'd love to call you.
I was late. I was on the wrong call. I was in the Google Meet. I'm Mark Estep.
Oh, cool.
I had a company years ago that was called Montana Mobile Processing, and I just sort of shelved it because I couldn't get money together for a unit. I had to go through agriculture grant fall through, and financing in 2013-14 wasn't forthcoming. So I shelved it and went on to other projects until I finished that and came back to this and found the need is greater than we even expected. So, so that's why I'm back in it.
So these are all key points from Walt and Mark and Matt, and I think a lot of people don't understand that it's possible for inspected kills to then go to a different meat cutter. I've talked to a few of the processors, and the ones I've talked to very much welcome the idea of working with mobile kill plants. You know, potentially some of them can make more efficient use of their labor and facility by doing that. So helping the discussion with DOL and the state to head in that direction seems like a really valuable first step. I guess I have a question for Matt or anybody, or several of you may have opinions about this. Historically, the stock growers and NCBA and some of the other establishment outfits have not been helpful in discussions of feeding Montanans meat. I'm really happy to hear that they signed on to support the training program at Miles Community College, and I'm happy to hear that they're talking with One Montana, but I'm also cautious, and I certainly will reach out to, I know some of the people at One Montana and happy to reach out to them, but I wonder if any of you have comments about discussions you have had or discussions you would like to have with the players and stock growers, because in the past they have derailed some of the efforts to focus on local and direct marketing. And I want to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Becky, on the One Montana calls, there hasn't been anyone representing the Montana Stockgrowers Association. It's just been individual producers. So I don't know.
Is Fred Wacker one of them?
Who?
Fred Wacker?
No, I don't think so.
Anyway, we don't need to focus on that right now. That's just some background work.
One person who's doing some really neat stuff is Matt Pearson from Highland Livestock between Livingston and Springdale. He's just wherever it's worth, anyone that knows him, I'd give him a call.
Becky, I'd comment, but it's not exactly directly. We here at NCAT are in the middle of a feasibility study for a processing facility on the Blackfoot Reservation, which is then putting me in touch with the economics again of this whole system. And one thing that bugs me is that we're getting to the end of this, and well, I shouldn't maybe anyway. The problem is that it's price. I mean, Jan said, "Oh yeah, we can stop. We could prevent them giving free beef to our schools, and that would be one way to be price competitive." My problem is, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time here. We need to be providing for how are you going to break into a Safeway? Safeway hasn't, as you know, and I've studied, hasn't allowed an American lamb to be sold in the store in Montana for over 20 years. And if you want to feed Montana, you can't only feed them through their independent grocery stores or direct market. All those things are wonderful, and I want to support them. But every time I get to that, the cost of doing so, which needs to be higher, granted, and maybe we need to be paying for that food. But the reason I'm talking about this regionalization is the ability to enter interstate commerce. It's not just, they go together. How are you going to make the investment to expand a facility? Even though I know that demand is high now, if you don't see clear markets with the right prices able to support that infrastructure. And that requires, I think, markets beyond just Montana alone. And products that are different and differentiated in a way that give them more value. All of that has to be considered as well. It's not just, we can do this. We can't put a barrier around the state of Montana and say we can just feed ourselves. Jan will get mad at me, but we had a mobile processing chicken project many years ago. And the joke at the end of it is, how do you sell a $25 chicken in Montana? And reality was that if you wanted to succeed at that whole thing, you had to sell the chicken for 25. Well, maybe we get it to 15. Point is, you've got to compete against, how do you sell a $15 and $25 chicken to Montanans? And that's how we need, and we need to be paying that for it, because that's in my mind, the real price of that meat. But it gets difficult when you have people, the commodities, dumping them into the state. So it's kind of a round and round circle of the people need to make investment in infrastructure, but they need to know that there's reliable and growing and possible markets for it. And we have great barriers to accessing those markets.
This is Matt. I would just say, I think good points, but I guess just from what, and again, I know I'm new at this, but from what I spend a lot of time at our meat processors, and they're buried, they're booked into 2021, they're being put in tough situations. There are more and more people wanting to bring meat. I've had calls from multiple neighboring ranchers that are historically, traditional cow-calf operators that want to switch. And I think that at some level, I mean, this is kind of back to the call with DOL, it comes down to just, I guess, entrepreneurial risk. Like, I mean, I think the times now are very different than a few years ago. COVID has shined a bright spotlight on the national meat system, or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of people don't want to be a part of that. And Montana's growing. And so I think at the end of the day, yeah, there's risk. If you were guaranteed that you could start something and guaranteed markets and all of that, then there'd be no risk. But of course there's risk, but I think that we're willing to take it. We think that things are changing, and And you got to provide a high quality product at the right price and convince people that it's worth it. And I think that times are changing. So I don't know. I think that, yeah, that's my reaction.
So we're getting close to 11 here, and you guys are talking about some of the central dilemmas that people have been encountering for the last few decades, and the times have changed in the last year, 6 months. This, to me, raises the question of what role can and should this group play? We already know that there are some entrepreneurs like Matt and others who are saying, let's just build it. We're ready to go. And none of us want to interfere with what they want to do. But there are also a lot of people in the cattle industry and others who are raising questions about, well, is this just a flash in the pan? What happens if people lose interest and they just want to go back to the same old, same old? And I guess I'm asking out loud if one of the roles of this group is to help educate two things. One, to help educate the consumers and legislative leaders in this state that we don't want to go back to the same old, same old. If we've learned anything from the last 6 months, that it is that we are living with a brittle, unjust, unstable system, and we don't want to return to 2019 status quo. So that's one question. And I guess I also wonder, I mean, all the meat packers in this state, bless their souls, are so busy and working so hard and taking financial risk. And I feel like maybe we should make a somewhat systematic effort to go to them and ask them what they need to help sustain this movement over the long haul, whether that means ways to help them get stuff into schools, ways to help them convince the consumer that they should pay a little bit more, ways to help them find the labor that they need, and I know many of them are short of. Do you think that's a strategy that we can do, that they maybe aren't well equipped to do all by themselves?
This is Will from Congressman Greg Gianforte's office, and I just wanted to chime in on that point because in addition to talking to Honeycutt with livestock department and various producer organizations, whether it's stock growers or the cattlemen or folks with Farmers Union even. We've also talked with the Montana Association of Meat Processors as well as the National Association that represents the non-Big Four plants. And the main things we heard from the processors as far as expanding actual capacity now were to deal with both the overtime fee charged by FSIS inspectors to increase their actual slaughter inspections so they could, as you say, put more beef in boxes to get it out to some of the other processors, as well as a grant. It provide basically grants for building capacity or improving their level of inspection. And there are pieces of legislation in the House that have been introduced by Colin Peterson called the RAMP Act, which is the grants to increase existing producer size and inspection level. And Dusty Johnson of South Dakota has also introduced legislation to reduce the amount charged by FSIS inspectors for overtime, what they call overtime, additional hours of inspection, so that existing facilities can schedule more slaughter days. Those are two pieces of legislation we're looking at very strongly as far as trying to move them forward in the House. I know there has been a lot of different discussion about the different levels of current inspection and their ability to sell across state lines or within the state in addition to their current capacity. I know there's some disagreement in some of the producer organizations as well about the relative merits of those, but I appreciate hearing your all's feedback on this, and we want to continue working with you as well as Honeycutt about what we can do as far as getting the mobile processing up and running. So I just thank you for inviting me to participate.
Thank you.
Walter Schweitzer here again. And I, I think on the very first phone call, I said that the real problem is the monopolies. I mean, we can address all of these processing issues, but the 5-year plan, you're going to go broke because these monopolies will undercut your markets for the most part. When you look at a mobile kill facility, I've run the numbers on it. It's a break even because when you're forced to compete against a monopoly for the cost of the kill and slaughter, and really the mobile slaughter unit will help the producer and it will help the butcher. But the person that's operating the mobile slaughter unit, if they're an individual, they're going to lose money. As long as these monopolies are allowed to manipulate and price gouge in the market, as long as we refuse to enforce the Stalker's Packyard laws and the antitrust laws and allow these packers to manipulate the market, we're going to have what we have. When we enforced those laws and broke these packers up is when we had processing plants in Great Falls, in Havre, in Shelby, in our communities around rural America. But we in 1981, when we repealed the law that the Packers Consent Decree, it's allowed these packers to grow and monopolize again and broke all of our regional processing plants. And so we can talk a lot about all of these individual opportunities, and there's lots of them that we could expand on. But until we control the monopolies, we're not going to get there.
And I can appreciate
That's a
that.
good message. Yeah, that's a good message for Gene Forte and Dane's representatives to take home with them, because they could be the people most likely to have a prayer of influencing that if they so chose.
And for 40 years, we've had a cheap food policy, which means, and that's why we've driven to this efficiency and concentration in our processing. And it's not just meat, it's in all of our commodities. The concentration and this efficiency is at the expense of resiliency. And we're experiencing that with empty shelves and empty meat counters right now. If Washington, D.C. would switch their philosophy to a secure food rather than cheap food, it would fix a lot of our problems in rural America.
One of the reasons why I think so many Americans have been willing to accept that mantra of cheap food is that they don't fully understand how viable the alternatives are under modern conditions. And so I have a nuts and bolts question. This may be for Mark, Estep and others, but if we're serious about decentralizing some mobile kill plants around the state, close to cattle, Mark, do you have a vision of what the offal disposal looks like and also the energy generation looks like? I was involved with the One Montana feasibility study, and some of the people who were executing the design paid lip service to listening to those of us who wanted to explore creative composting options and renewable energy for energy generation. But in fact, it wasn't taken seriously. And I think it should be. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, Mark, or anybody else.
Well, that's one of the biggest issues, is what to do with the offal. And part of the problem here, I think, is in Montana, the ones who are in charge of that are the counties. And different counties react different ways to how that should be handled. Some places you can compost it on your ranch. Some places you gotta, run the wastewater through a treatment plant. It depends on where you are. The drop, the hide and the head and bones and stuff is one thing, and the guts and such is another. But I think there's a way to, I don't know. I know there's one renderer in Spokane who does this, but I think we need to explore someone who would do that function. There's a lot of issues that that are corollaries to the processing industry. I think we should, all the existing plants have to deal with it. I think we should talk to them. What do they do with it? I haven't really discussed it with them. But yeah, that's a big issue. I agree. I don't have
Well,
the answer.
the Montana DOT has been involved with very successful livestock and roadkill composting operations. The know-how exists in the state to do it, both at MSU and in the state and in some counties. So that may be another area where we should help to coordinate some know-how.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back to you, Mark. This is Matt. I know. Looks like he signed off, but Tommy Bass from MSU.
Right.
I've heard. I took his HACCP class, but I haven't connected with him yet. But he's a real expert in this thing, and on the specific question of, waste disposal, both wastewater and offal, or guts, and
right.
But just to remind, there are other. There's a whole, like Trivan, and this whole thing started in the San Juan Islands, and it's happening in other places. So it's under USDA. So if it's happening elsewhere, clearly we should be able to do it here. And then just one other comment. I think the education piece is super important, and it relates back to some of those other comments about building markets and making this work financially. And it's like that cheap food piece. It's like educating folks that, maybe the actual price at, Safeway or Walmart is cheap, but that food's not ultimately cheap. There are huge costs for the people and, our society that aren't reflected in that $4.99 per pound price. And so I think the more we can, I think an education campaign would really help, and it would really dovetail nicely with trying to build the reliability of a market so that whoever takes the leap into processing, it'll work financially, so that people know that it's not apples to apples with different prices.
So we're past 11. And there have been a number of different pieces here of potential marching orders for all of us. I've been taking notes, and maybe the easiest way to handle this is I'll write up some summaries of the issues that have been raised and try to tie it to things that we could do or ways that we can keep help from the congressional delegation or other things. And then you guys can all amend that list. And then maybe before and during the next call, we can try to target some actions. I think there's an awful lot of agreement on what the problems are, what the challenges are, a little bit of disagreement about which markets to target first and or how to, be strategic about doing more than one market. But I guess, does anybody want to, is that okay with you guys, or does anybody else want to make other comments before we sign off here to try to plan for what we're going to do in the next go around?
Sounds good to me. I mean, I'd make notes, but I don't have complete ones. But yeah, somebody's got to do it. You do it.
I'll take a stab at it, and I know that
Okay.
will be useful additions. Any other comments before we sign off and everybody thinks about where they want to go next?
No, I think you've got a good plan for trying to capture what we've talked about today, and I think that's what's going to take to figure out what we want to talk about next. And then we can start doing. I mean, and I think there are a lot of us that we're on the call that are doing things, and just knowing that you're not all alone is sometimes worth quite a bit.
That's for sure.
Here, here. All right, well, everyone's participation is much appreciated. And to those of you who are coming from congressional offices, thank you. And please don't hesitate to contact us if you have more information or more questions. Because ultimately, whether we're focused on feeding locally or not, ultimately this does involve federal issues. And I'd like to think that maybe Montana can try to set a good example for other states who have similar dilemmas.
Right here.
Good.
Thanks, everyone. As long as this time it seems to be working for a lot of people, I'll just do the same thing for August, this Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'll be looking for notes. And I do have a recording of this as well.
Oh, great.
Excellent. Well, good day.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Thanks.